From WQAD News 8, my name is Joe McCoy, and you are listening to Sports with the Real McCoy. And we now know where two generational type prospects will be going in the NHL and in the NBA. And just a hint for those who don't know, one of them is coming to a Chicago team. So first, we had the NHL draft lottery, which took place about a week ago. And Connor Bedard is a prospect out of Canada who is 17 years old and is doubted a generational type prospect. And people are not using that term lightly. People are saying that he is Sidney Crosby-esque, Wayne Gretzky-esque, Ovechkin-esque. I mean, this is a player that has not been this coveted in the NHL draft in at least the past 20 years. And, you know, he's one of the most coveted draft picks of all time. But this kid is unbelievable to watch. Now, I am a Blackhawks fan. Of course, when they had their dynasty, you know, I was watching every game. It was so incredible to grow up in Chicago when the Blackhawks had their dynasty and won 3 Stanley Cups. But it's been rough sailing for the Blackhawks lately. I mean, everything that is amazing has to come to an end eventually. We kind of lost all of the players that made that dynasty run so incredible. If you go back, you had Hossa, Duncan Keith, and now we have lost Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane. So the dynasty is over. The team, the core that was there is over. But the Blackhawks have been blessed by the hockey gods, and Connor Bedard is going to be a Chicago Blackhawks, as the Blackhawks have won the NHL draft lottery. Now, when we get into the lottery just a little bit, I want to pull up the numbers here. So the Blackhawks had the third best odds to win the draft lottery, to get that number 1 overall pick. They had an 11.5% chance. 2 teams ahead of them. One team, I believe, was the Canucks, had a 18.5% chance. But as I said, the hockey gods came down and favored the Blackhawks, and they're going to get to draft Connor Bedard. Now, I want to say the draft is not until June 28th, so it's still about a month or 40 days until the draft selection will actually be made. But the Blackhawks are getting Connor Bedard. It is set in stone. You know, he's one of those players that you don't even consider trading the draft pick with how good he is. But when you get into him as a player, I was watching some of his highlights, watching some of his tape and his games from him playing in the Canadian Junior Hockey League. This kid is unfreaking believable. The speed that he shoots his shot at, and how quickly his release is. I mean, you blink and you miss him winding up for the shot. It's unbelievable how fast this kid can shoot. It's unbelievable how great of a skater he is. I mean, he looks like a guy who is playing against high schoolers with how good he is. But his performance in the 2023 junior tournament for the Canadian national junior team set several national and international point records in that tournament. In only 7 games, this is incredible. In only 7 games, he had 9 goals and 14 assists. So he had 23 points in 7 games. The kid is born in 2005. As I said, he's only 17 years old. And in 2018, when he was only 12 years old, an article by Hockey News deemed him the future of hockey. So this kid has been on people's radar since he was a teenager. I mean, this kid was going through puberty, and people were already deeming him, as long as he stayed on track, the next great one. But it is incredible that he is now going to be a Chicago Blackhawk. The Blackhawks are very much in a rebuilding stage right now. We've kind of sold all of our assets for draft picks. And the fact that it has worked out so perfectly, where we're now going to get to draft this kid who's going to transform our franchise, is incredibly exciting for Blackhawks fans. But one thing, this was bonkers to me when I heard this, but when the pick was announced that the Blackhawks had won the draft lottery, the Blackhawks, this was a report by the Chicago Sun-Times, it was reported that in an hour and a half of the draft pick being announced, that the Blackhawks were going to get Connor Bedard, the Blackhawks sold $2.5 million worth of season tickets. That is how much of a draw this kid is, and he hasn't even put on our jersey yet. Hell, he's not even on the team yet. He technically is not on the Chicago Blackhawks yet, even though it is a foregone conclusion that he will be drafted by us. But in the WHL, he was named the player of the decade, or he was a player in a decade of time to record a 20-game point streak in consecutive seasons. So for 20 games in a row in multiple seasons, he had either a goal or an assist. And I just read you off those numbers: 9 goals and 14 assists in only 7 games in this international tournament. So he is a franchise-altering player for the Chicago Blackhawks. A lot of people were saying the Blackhawks probably had a 4-ish year rebuild. And now they're saying that rebuild is now 2 to 3 years. I mean, he chops off 2 years of the time that it would take to really build the Blackhawks up to contenders. And it's incredible that they're going to get him. It's going to be so much fun. Bring hockey back to Chicago. Not that it went away, but people just, when the team isn't good, people don't care as much. I would say the only 2 teams that people will care about no matter what and will go to games even when they're bad in Chicago would be the Bears and the Cubs. People will support the Bears and go to their games no matter what, and they'll be talked about no matter what. But when the Blackhawks aren't that good, not that people don't care at all. People are diehard hockey fans in Chicago, but it's just not fun to watch a team that isn't winning a lot. That's for any sport. So you saw in the amount of season tickets that they sold, the draw that this kid is bringing in, and I cannot wait to see him on the ice in a Blackhawks uniform. And, hopefully, I really think he'll help attract other free agents to the Blackhawks, because everyone realizes how incredible this kid is going to be, barring any injuries. And other players are going to want to play with that. And then when we shift to the NBA, another generational type player, I would say the best player in the NBA draft since 2003 when LeBron James was coming out. But Victor Wembanyama, who is from France, a 19-year-old, he is going to the San Antonio Spurs. So the Spurs won the draft lottery last night. I was watching it live on ESPN, and it was incredible to see the guy who was there representing the Spurs, his reaction when it was revealed that the Spurs had won the #1 overall pick. I mean, he said in his interview he felt like he was going to faint. He was so excited. But another player that is a franchise-altering prospect. And you look at the Spurs; they've been kind of a dynasty for a while. I mean, when they had Tim Duncan and they have one of the greatest coaches of all time in Greg Popovich. But they were an incredible team and are such an incredibly well-run franchise. And the fact that they're now adding the best player in the draft since LeBron James, I mean, bam, boom, the Spurs are back to being, I wouldn't say contenders yet. They still got work to do, but having the NBA, since there's only 5 people on the court at a time, having a superstar like a Giannis or a Kevin Durant or a LeBron or Kobe, they completely transform a franchise overnight if you get them. This guy is absolutely massive. He's 7'3". He wears size 20.5 shoe, and his wingspan is 8 feet long. It's incredible. The size, I don't know what factories these type of human beings are being produced, the ones that are in the NBA, but it's unreal. I mean, any professional athlete, football players, basketball players, I don't know where these guys are getting produced, what concoction they're putting together to come out with these guys, but someone should not be 7'3" with an 8-foot wingspan and be able to move like Victor Wembanyama does. But at 14 years old, he emerged as one of Europe's top prospects. He was widely viewed as analysts as the potential first overall pick since he was 16 years old. So for the past 3 years, this guy has been on the NBA's radar as he is going to be this generational type prospect. But when you watch him play, his mobility on the court, his ball handling skills are incredible. I mean, he really plays like a guard. And he's 7'3". He's a pretty darn good shooter. He's still got a lot to work on his game, but he's a pretty darn good 3-point shooter. He's almost impossible to block because of how tall and how long his wingspan is. And you see him moving with the ball. You see him moving off of pick and rolls, off of screens. I mean, he is fluid. A lot of times, when you're watching college basketball and you see someone who's 7 feet tall, even Chet Holmgren. Chet Holmgren is an incredible prospect, and I hope he recovers from his Achilles injury as soon as possible. I'm very excited to see him back on the court, but they just move a little bit awkwardly. Like, it's impossible to be that tall and move naturally as someone who's, 6 feet tall, a normal height person. But Wembanyama moves naturally. It's incredible to watch. His arms look like they're about to touch the court with how long they are. But I mean, the guy's got it all. He's got the passing ability. He's got the ball handling ability, the shooting ability. Obviously, he's an incredible shot blocker because of his length. He also is really good at kind of timing when to block the shot. The only thing, there's of course things he has to work on. No one's a perfect player. But he has to put on weight. He is skinny as a rail, a lot like Giannis was when he was coming into the draft. Giannis also drafted, Giannis was drafted when he was 18 years old out of Greece, someone who had the potential to turn into a superstar, which we all know Giannis has. But Wembanyama has to put on weight because when guys want to go at him physically, they can. I mean, if you had Wembanyama guarding LeBron James, LeBron would just take it to the rack every single time and bully him to the basket. So being tall is incredible, but you got to put on some size and beef up a little bit. It does hurt him when he's trying to rebound. He does struggle to box out people, again, because he's just an extremely skinny guy. But the NBA is going to put weight on him. When you look at Giannis now, I mean, Giannis is a pretty darn buff dude. He has put on an incredible amount of size and filled out that frame that he has. And, Giannis back-to-back MVPs, I believe. But one of the best players in our game. Some would argue the best player in the game right now. So to me, when I'm watching him, he really reminds me of Kevin Durant. I mean, Kevin Durant, the Slim Reaper, as they call him, super long, super lengthy, incredible shooter. I mean, that's really probably the best comp for him is Kevin Durant. But he seems to be even better than Kevin Durant at this point in his career. And I gotta give a tough shout out to the Detroit Pistons fans, because that is a team that really suffered last night. So the Detroit Pistons had the worst record in the NBA. I believe they won 18 games last season. They were absolutely atrocious. And they had the best odds to get the number 1 overall pick. The way these draft lotteries work, you get a percentage, and it's like it's basically like the lottery, the lottery where you win money. They have numbers that are picked, and your numbers have to line up. And the Pistons had the best odds to get the number 1 overall pick, and they were at least almost certain to get a top 4 pick, and they land out of the top 4, end up getting the 5th overall pick. And for a team, I don't like to say teams are tanking, but for a team that was the worst team in the league, and obviously Wembanyama would have drastically altered their franchise, to fall out of the top 4 is a heartbreaker for Pistons fans, and also, people in that organization. I'm sure they had their hopes up that their whole franchise was about to be changed. Now they end up getting the 5th pick in the draft, and that's going to be tough sailing for that team. But for the San Antonio Spurs, they are right back in action. I think this is an incredible destination for Wembanyama to go to. He's going into one of the best organizations in the entire NBA with Greg Popovich, again, a Hall of Fame level coach. He's going to learn. He's going to, be put in position to do everything right. So I think this is incredible for the young man. And going back to Bedard for the Blackhawks, the whole city of Chicago is welcoming Bedard with extreme open arms. People are ecstatic that he is coming to the Blackhawks. So there was a little bit of hope that the Bulls, were going to get Wembanyama. I think they had a 1.8% chance, so it was very slim. But those were the same odds we had when we got Derrick Rose. But the basketball gods were not in our favor. You kind of can only get the gods for one sport at a time. So the hockey gods looked down on us. The basketball gods look down on the San Antonio Spurs. But thank you guys so much for listening and tuning in. I wanted to come out and do this, preview these two players. It's not often that you see generational type prospects in sports. You got the Bryce Harpers of the world, the LeBron James. Sometimes in football, you get generational type quarterbacks and stuff like that. But to have 2 generational type players in 2 separate sports in 1 year is pretty incredible. And the fact that the Blackhawks are getting one of them is even more incredible. So thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you have an incredible day, and I'll see you next week.